Welcome. I hope that you're ready to learn a ton about React Native. My name is Stephen Greider and I will be your instructor. I've written many courses on React, and this course in particular is my second course focused on React Native. I have collected a tremendous amount of feedback on why students want to learn React Native, and this course is kind of like the culmination of that effort. Every topic is carefully presented in a very specific order to make sure that you can walk away from this course with the skills that you need to build awesome native applications. So the overwhelming goal here, like the thing we're really going to drive home towards, is building usable real applications. In addition to just learning, hey, what the heck is React Native? My goal with this course is to start coding on real projects as soon as possible, but React Native makes that just a little bit difficult as it requires a little environment setup ahead of time. So we're going to go through a little bit of getting started stuff in the next couple of sections before we start working on our first application. Even if you've already ran through the React Native installation, if you did it like a couple months ago, hey, no problem, you can probably skip it. But if you installed React Native like when it first came out, then I really recommend that you go through the installation directions, because setup with React Native is kind of a little bit notoriously difficult. Now, one quick word about compatibility with your operating system. If you are using OS X, so you're using a Mac, we will be going through setup with both iOS and Android. Okay, so we'll be able to run iOS and Android applications. And if you're using Windows, we'll be setting up just Android, because Windows does not have iOS support with React Native. Just yet. Officially, I should say. The official React Native documentation has instructions for setup with Linux as well. So if you're running Linux, you can certainly go through those directions, but we will not be going through it on this course, do the actual videos. Every app that we build in this course is going to be 100% compatible with both iOS and Android, so no need to sweat getting left in the cold if you do not have the perfect OS setup. So with that in mind, let's get started with our environment setup in the next section. Let's talk a little bit about our roadmap to developing our first application. The first thing I'm going to do is install a couple of dependencies, and these are going to be different depending on your operating system. So you might be taking this course on either a Mac or Windows or Linux machine. Depending on what machine you're on, we're going to go through a different set of installation directions to get started with a couple dependencies. In this in this course, I've provided directions for getting started with iOS on Mac, Android on Mac, and Android on Windows. Depending on your operating system, you will take one of those tracks and go through to completion. So that's going to be the first thing that we do. After that, we're going to install ESLint. ESLint is a system for automatically catching errors in the code that we write with JavaScript. This is optional installation. You don't have to use ESLint if you don't want to, but I highly recommend going through it. In this course, I've provided ESLint installation directions for a couple of different common code editors, and we'll walk through the installation one by one, depending upon which code editor you use. After all that setup, we will finally get started by generating a React Native application, and then boom, we're going to start coding. So the one thing I want to just kind of temper expectations right now, or set expectations, with React Native, unfortunately, there really is a lot of setup to go through. I love starting off tutorials by working on an example right away, like in the first section or two. But unfortunately, with React Native, we have to do the setup ahead of time because we can't write any code without it. So I encourage you to stay strong. We're going to power through all this setup, and then we're going to get started with the first application. The first app that we're going to work on, it really looks awesome. I'm very happy with how it turned out. So I encourage you to tough it out through the installation, and then we're going to get started with the first application. Let's get started. In the next section, we're going to be walking through installation directions if you are on Mac and you want to develop iOS applications. So I will catch you in the next section. In this section, we're going to walk through installation of React Native on OS X. So if you are not on a Mac, or you do not want to install iOS specifically, if you instead want to go with Android, you'll want to jump to the next section where we'll talk about the installation of Android on either OS X or on Windows. So just make sure that you're in the right place and you go through at least one of these setup tracks, just one of them. So the setup that we're going to go through inside this section for iOS on OS X is going to be identical, nearly identical, to the installation directions that are provided in the official React Native documentation. Let's pull that documentation up just to start. In my browser, I'm going to make a new tab and search for React Native. And then I'll click on the Getting Started link right here. So this is the documentation for getting started with Mac and iOS. We will go through these instructions right here, so if you get lost at any point in time, you can always come back to these directions. But I will tell you right now that we're going to go through the setup with a lot more detail than what's listed right here. I just want you to know that these directions do exist. So let's get started with the setup. I want you to know right now, and this is going to hold true throughout the entire course, with any tutorial I write, it is very important to me that you understand exactly why we are installing each tool and why we write each line of code. So before we start doing that installation, we're going to just have a very quick discussion about the purpose of each of these dependencies and exactly what we are installing. The first dependency that we're going to install is Xcode. Xcode is Apple's official IDE for building software for nearly any official Apple device, like iPhones, iWatches, or Mac laptops. We will be using Xcode to build our apps and install them on a mobile device. Xcode also comes bundled with the iOS simulator, which is a tool used to run mobile apps directly on your desktop or laptop. Second, we'll be installing Homebrew. Homebrew is a Mac OS X dependency management program which we're going to use for exactly one purpose, just to install Node. That's kind of the funny thing about this setup here. You have to install programs just to install programs. It always kind of struck me as a little bit funny. Anyways, after we install Homebrew, we'll use it to install Node and NPM. Node and NPM are a package deal of sorts. They are installed at the same time. Node will be used to run JavaScript outside the browser, which is what we're going to be doing, while NPM is used for dependency management. In our case, we'll be using Node to process some JavaScript files that we'll be creating. The JavaScript that we write will be processed by Node and then pumped into our React Native application, but we'll talk all about that later on. Fourth, we'll be installing Watchman. Watchman is a program developed by Facebook for exactly one purpose: watching files on our hard drive and noticing when they get changed. Watchman will be used by React Native to automatically process changes to our code base and update the mobile app that we're working on. In practice, we don't actually have to do anything with Watchman besides install it. The React Native the React Native command line tool will take care of everything from there. Speaking of which, the last thing that we'll install is the React Native command line interface. This has two purposes, the first of which is to generate new React Native projects, and the second is to run our projects in either the iOS or Android simulator. So that's the purpose of each piece here. A couple different items to install, and we're going to get started right now. First with Xcode. So we're going to start off with installing Xcode, and then we'll continue in the next section with everything else to install as well. Let me tell you right now one thing about Xcode, very important remark. Even if you already have Xcode installed, I beg you, please, 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 go through the Xcode installation process and make sure that you do not have any pending updates. In other words, make sure you have the latest version of Xcode. You would not believe the number of problems I've troubleshot that were caused by out-of-date versions of Xcode. So it's really low-hanging fruit. If you just do the update right now, you'll be good to go. So let's walk through the installation process. I'm going to first open up the App Store. So I'm going to hit Command Space to bring up the Spotlight search, and then look for App Store. The App Store is kind of notoriously slow, but once it actually boots up, on the top right-hand side, I will search for Xcode. And then we'll get our search results eventually. Eventually. All right, there we go. And on the very top left, I have the Xcode result. So I'll open up Xcode. And I've already got Xcode installed myself, but go ahead, if you do not have it installed, this button will be green. Click Install and go through the installation process. Like one or two windows will pop up and it'll just say, hey, accept the license agreement or what have you. Just click Accept, and it will install Xcode for you. If you already have Xcode installed, so really important, if you already have Xcode installed, again, I beg you, please come up here to the top right to the Updates tab and just verify that you have the latest version of Xcode. There we go. So you can see that I installed an Xcode update a couple days ago, version 7.3. If you have a newer version, no problem whatsoever. Just make sure that you've got the latest version of Xcode installed. Okay, so that's it. That's Xcode in a nutshell. If you are going through the installation right now, continue with that. We're going to take a quick break and then come back in the next section and start walking through our Node installation. In the last section, we got started with our Xcode installation, and now we're going to continue with everything else, starting with Homebrew. So Homebrew, again, is used to install Node. That's all we're going to use it for. Homebrew is also used to install many other OS X programs. You may already have it installed. If you do not, no problem. We're going to install it right now. So I'm going to open up my browser, and we're going to navigate directly to brew.sh. Once at brew.sh, there's a fantastic link right in the middle here, big text box. We're going to highlight everything inside of here. So I'm going to highlight all of it, and I will copy it, and then we're going to execute this script at our command line. That script right there will automatically install and configure Homebrew for us. So I'll flip over to my terminal. I've already got my terminal open. If you do not have yours open, you can open it right now by just running terminal like so. Once my terminal is open, I'm going to paste that link in here. I'm going to make sure that I've got the entire link, so everything from user bin all the way through the ending quotes with install over here. And then I will simply run it to install it. In my case, I've already got Homebrew installed, so everything is good to go. If you already have Homebrew installed, you can update it by running brew update. And this will run through and install a bunch of, update your listing of all dependencies and packages that Brew has access to. This usually takes like a minute or two to run. We'll give it another second, and then I'll just, there we go. Hopefully yours runs a little bit faster than mine. I'm not on the fastest internet connection here, but no problem. Well, while that runs, we'll go ahead and go through the Node installation as well. So I'm going to, again at the command line, run the command brew install node. And this is all it takes to install Node.js. In my case, I'm already running that update. In addition, I actually already have Node installed right now, version 6.3. If you have an earlier version of Node, no problem whatsoever. Just make sure that you have at least version 4.5. That's kind of like the minimum cutoff for React Native right now. At least make sure that you have 4.5. This installation might take you a minute or two to run through, so no problem. If you want to pause the video right now and let the installation finish up, fantastic. Once the installation is complete, I'm going to confirm that Node is installed by, at the command line, running node-v. And when I run that, you can see that I get my version pop up. So fantastic, that means everything's installed. I'm ready to use Node. I can now also install the Watchman program as well. So I will run brew install Watchman. Remember, Watchman is a program developed by Facebook for just watching our hard drive for file changes. That's all we're using it for. So I will install Watchman. In my case, again, I think I've already got installed, as you see right here. If you don't have installed, just go ahead and again, let it do its thing. It'll only take a minute or two to get set up. Then, the very last thing that we need to install will be the React Native CLI. At the command line again, I will run npm install -g React Native CLI. And make sure you got the dashes in between each of those. In my case, again, for the fourth time in a row, I've already got this installed. So it's either going to decide to try to do an update or just say, hey, you already got this going. Okay, looks like it just went ahead and did an update perhaps. So that's it. That's all we need to get started with the React Native CLI. At this point in time, we're now going to use React Native CLI to generate our first project. Once you generate a React Native project, it really takes a minute to go through the installation. It downloads a lot of dependencies and does a lot of project setup. So when we generate this project, this first one that we're going to get started with, it's going to take a little bit of time to run through. So we'll take a quick break and then continue development in the next section. So let's get started with this startup process. I'm in a directory right now where I want to place my project. So if you're not in a good project directory, a good place to place it, you'll want to change into that directory. For me, right now, I'm in a nice place called workspace, prod, which is for me short for production. It means that this is the code that I'm going to be writing for the course and all that kind of good stuff. But anyways, the point is that I'm in a great spot right here to get started with the project. So we're going to generate our first project by running the command line interface. We'll type in React Native init albums. React Native is a reference to the React Native command line tool. Init means we want to initialize a new project. And then the last term here, albums, is the name of the first application that we're going to build. So the name of this application is going to be albums. So let's go ahead and run this. Again, this is going to take some amount of time to get through. So I'm going to pause the video right now, and we'll continue in a little bit by getting started with our ESLint setup, and then we're going to start working on our first application. So I will catch you in the next section. There actually is one last quick thing that I want to do after generating our first project here. I want to make sure that we just go ahead and learn how to launch our project with React Native and run it in the simulator. The simulator process, or getting it set up for every platform, is just a little bit different. So as we start working on our applications, I'm not going to specifically say like, hey, start up your, run this command to run on OS X. I'm just going to say, hey, start this up in the simulator. So if you are on OS X and you're running an iOS application when we get started, we're going to use exactly one command to run our application on iOS. And it's basically this right here. You probably already read it yourself. First, I'm going to change into my project directory, so albums, and then I'm going to run React Native run-iOS. So this is going to build our project, launch the iOS simulator, and then show it. The build process takes the first time quite a good amount of time, so if it takes you a little bit of time to get it spooled up, don't sweat it. But once it gets going, you should see the React Native application appear in the window. One last quick note here, when it launches the simulator, and it looks like it will, yep, here it is. So this is a simulator running it on our device, or excuse me, on our desktop. Let me give us a better background here. Yeah, there we go. One very quick note here, something that I have occasional issues with is once the application starts up and we get the simulator here, it, for whatever reason, decides not to automatically launch the app for us. So if that happens to you, if the simulator starts up but like nothing actually happens and it looks like everything else is all done, you can drag here, so just click and drag over to the second tab, and then you should have your application of albums on the screen, just like I have these others on here, and you can just click directly on albums to get started. So again, if it does not automatically dump you into the application, you can just drag on over and click it to get started. Okay, cool. So let this finish up. We'll make sure that it runs successfully, and then we will continue in the next section and get started with our application. In this section, we are going to get started with React Native on our Windows development environment. So if you're running Mac OS X, if you're on a Mac right now, you can skip this section and go on to the next one. If you're on Windows, stay here. You can tell because I got the big ol' Windows logo on the screen here. You're in the right spot if you're on Windows, so to speak. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We need to install a lot of different software. So I'm going to be honest with you. Setup of React Native on on Windows is a little bit tough because there's a lot of stuff to install. So we're going to go through it. We're going to do our best to install just one thing at a time, but sometimes it's, it might save us a little bit to install two things simultaneously because, sometimes it's just a long download. Anyways, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is open up my browser. And just because I'm on Windows, I'm going to use Internet Explorer, no reason in particular, but I am going to use Google rather than Bing. All right, so the first thing we're going to install is the Java JDK, or really SDK, but whatever, JDK, sure. This is not so we're going to search for Java SDK. This is not necessarily a prerequisite for React Native. This is really a prerequisite for running Java apps of any type, or Android apps of any type. So I'm going to search for Java SDK, and then the first result, Java SE-downloads, will go there. Now on this page, there's a very prominent download button to download Java Platform JDK. I'm currently on version 8. If there's a more recent version, no problem, go for it. So we will download. And at the next page, we need to select the operating system that we are downloading this JDK for. So on the Java SE development kit right here, I will first accept the license agreement, and then I will find the selection for Windows 64. So sure, right here, let's install it. Then we get prompted to run this thing. Yep, sounds great. And again, we could start off another installation while this thing's downloading, but I really want to just kind of, as much as possible, run one thing at a time, because otherwise it kind of gets confusing because I'm just clicking all over the place. So after the download is finished, we will start up the installation. And there we go. So next, you know the deal here, you know the drill. Next, 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 next. And we are done with the installation. If you see a destination folder pop up right here, that's no problem. Just click next also. And finally, we are actually installing the library. And it should just take a moment or two. Like I said, a moment or two. There we go. Fantastic. So now I've got the Java JDK installed on my system. So we'll go ahead and close that, and we are done with step one. Now, we still have a lot of steps to go through, so let's continue going. The next thing that I'm going to install, I'm going to first flip back over to Google, and I need to go through the installation of Node.js. Node.js is all about running JavaScript outside of the browser environment, so kind of running it in a desktop environment instead. We are installing Node for two purposes. First, because we need to use Node to generate our application bundle, so to kind of take all the JavaScript that we write and stuff it down all into one file to serve up on our mobile device. And we also use Node for package management as well, as we will find in just a second. So at Google, I'm going to do a search for Node. I will go click on the link, and then you get prompted for a download. You can either go with the stable download or the current download, the current version. It's completely up to you. I usually just run with the current version because it has access to all the latest features. But you know what the heck, I'll change things up and go with the current version instead. So I'm going to download the installer for again Windows x64. It's a very quick download. And okay, well, I've already got Node installed here, and it's a later version, so I guess I already have the 6.6. So I'm just going to hit OK and kind of be done with it. Of course, if you do not have Node installed, certainly go through that process. Okay, so that's it for Node. Very quick install as well. And we're going to move on to one last installation inside this video, and then we'll continue in the next one. So the last thing we're going to look for, I'm going to flip back over to Google again, and the last thing I'm going to look for is Python 2. So I'll search for Python 2, and here's my download link right here, download Python on python.org. And very prominently, we are prompted for download the latest version for Windows. We want version 2 of Python, not version 3, version 2. So I will download Python, run it. And just like Node, I believe I already have this installed on my system, so it might just give me a quick error, but we'll see what the result is. And okay, yep, I've already got Python installed, so it's prompting me to change, repair, or remove. If you do not have Python installed, again, all you have to do is hit that next, 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 and you're good to go. Okay, so I know that I said that this was the last thing we're going to install, but there actually is just one last thing that I want to start up for installation because it's going to save us a lot of time in the next section. So again, over at Google, I'm going to do a search for Android Studio download. And then very prominently, again, it's fantastic. Thank goodness these are all the first links that pop up. We find download Android Studio and SDK tools. So we'll click on that link. And then very prominently on here, just a little bit down the page, is download Android Studio. So we'll start this download off. And as you see, this is not an instant download. This is 1.6 gigabytes large. So there's a lot of stuff to have to pull in here. So we will start up the download process for the Android Studio, and let's continue in the next section and start installing the Android Studio. In the last section, we finished the download of Android Studio. So if I open up my downloads folder, I should now see, and I know this text is very small right now, but bear with me, I'm on the Windows machine. My Windows machine is not really set up for recording video as well as my Mac is. Anyways, back on topic. This is our Android Studio right here, the installation file. So I'm going to start up the installation. And this is an installation that's going to take a very long time to finish. So we're going to start it up right now, install a couple other things, and then probably take a 15-minute break, to be honest, and then come on back and work with the Android Studio. So we'll get the launcher. Here we go, Android setup. Next, we get prompted with three options here: the Studio, SDK, and Virtual Device. And we want all three of these, so we will leave them all checked. Go on to the next. It's a license agreement. If you want to read it, certainly feel free to do so. I'll hit I agree, and then this is very critical, very critical. Down here on the second link, we've got a link to the SDK. All right, so a link to the SDK. I want you to take note of this, the second term inside of here, or I guess third. So I've got C users and then your username for your particular machine. Okay, this is going to be very relevant later on. So for me, my user on the machine that I'm currently on, I am logged in as computer because that's just what I called my login. Yours might be like Matt, Jane, whatever your login name is. Just keep that in mind. So I'm not going to change any links in here, and I highly encourage you to not change them either. We'll go next. We can change the name if you would like. I'm going to leave it the same. And then finally, we'll start off the installation. So this right here is the part that is probably going to take a very long time. Trust me, this progress bar right here is quite deceptive. This will probably end up taking a little bit longer than we think. So while this runs, we are going to do a little bit, or just another piece of installation. At my start menu, I'm going to open the start menu and then just type in command, and this is going to open up the command prompt. I'm going to right click this and run it as administrator. So please make sure that you do launch this as an administrator. And so here I am at my command prompt. At this point in time, we've already installed both Node and Python. So just to test out the installation, I will type node-v. And I see here, yep, version 6.6. So you will want to make sure that you correctly see some number print up here. If you see something that says unrecognized command, well, something is definitely off with the Node installation, and we'll need to do a little bit of troubleshooting. The next thing we're going to do is install the React Native command line tools. The React Native command line tools have exactly two purposes. First off, it generates a new project, which is what we're really concerned about right now. And its second purpose is to test our projects inside of the Android simulator. We can install the React Native command line tools by running npm install -g React Native CLI. So this will take just a second to install. It's a rather small package. And there we go. We are now going to use the React Native CLI to generate our first project. So by default, chances are your command line is opening you up in Windows System 32. This is not really a fantastic place, obviously, for placing a React Native project. So I'm going to change to another drive for myself. Basically, you can take yourself to wherever you have your workspace, right? Any projects you want to place, it might be in My Documents or wherever it might be. In my case, I've already got a folder called React Native. And so inside of this folder, I'm going to place my new React Native project that we're going to generate right now. So once I'm inside of a place where I can store my React Native application, I will use the React Native CLI that we just installed by writing react-native init and then albums. So the first part here is a reference to the command line tools that we just installed. The first argument to that is init, which is us telling it, hey, please initialize or create a new project. And then the third term here, the second argument, is albums. So this is telling React Native that we want to initialize a new project called albums. So I'll hit enter, and it will do its own little thing. Now, installation of a new React Native project can take a little bit of time, like definitely a hefty little bit of time. So while this is running, let's go back over and check out our Android installation. So I'm still only at 69%. So I think that this would be a fantastic time to go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we will have the Android SDK completely installed, and we will also have our React Native project installed as well. In the last section, we generated our first React Native project at the command line using the React Native CLI tools. At the end of that installation process, you should have seen some instructions like this. In other words, how to run our app on iOS and how to run it on Android. Now, let me be very clear here that the React Native team is being almost sadistic, I would say. I'm going to be honest with you, almost sadistic by making it sound like this is as easy as it is to get started with Android. No, there is certainly, without a doubt, a lot more installation that has to go on outside of just running this simple little command here. So in this section, we're going to get at some of that additional setup that kind of gets glossed over. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do is open up the Android Studio. So we just finished installing that in the next section, or last section, excuse me. I'm going to go ahead and pop it open. And then once it's open, I'm going to open an existing Android Studio project. So believe it or not, when we created our React Native project in the last section, that gave us a starting Android project. So I'm going to open up an existing project, and I'm going to navigate to the folder where I placed that project. So for me, I placed it on my E drive inside of a folder called React Native. That generated a project called Albums. And inside of there is a folder called Android. And this is our Android project right here. So I'm going to go ahead and open it on up. And this is going to take just a moment to pop open. All right, there we go. So when we first open this up, I get a nice big error message here. You might get a little bit of a different message. You might see something that says like, I don't know, hey, compiling Gradle or something like that down at the bottom. So if you see that message, that is totally fine. Just let it do its thing. After a couple of seconds, like 20 or 30, you'll see a tab pop up here on the bottom, something that says Messages. So click on Messages, and you should see the message that I see right here. Now I know that the text is a little bit small here, but what it says is, cause, fail to find target with hash string Android 23. And then beneath it is a nice little link that says install missing platforms and sync project. This little button right here, this link, oh, you have no idea how much pain this thing is saving us from. It is saving us from a lot of hassle and a lot of trouble. So we're just going to click this link right here. And thank goodness, Android Studio is going to automatically install, download and install a little bit of software for us. So we're going to click accept on the license agreement. Next, we'll download the SDK. It will unzip it for us and go through the installation. Now, I certainly could pause the video here, but yeah, again, it only takes a moment to finish up. So all done there. I'll click finish. And now, again, I get another error message pop up right away saying, hey, failed to find build tools revision 23. Again, we will click on the very helpful link right here, install build tools 23 and sync project. And boom, we're good to go. Again, you wouldn't believe how much trouble that just saved for us. That just saved us a lot of trouble. By the way, if you get a Gradle plugin pop-up, we are going to hit don't remind me again for this project, and okay, we're good to go. Okay, so we still have a little bit of work to do here. What we just installed were some tools to set up an Android emulator, something that can like run our React Native application on the desktop that we can debug against on the fly. So we still have a little bit of setup to do though. The next thing I'm going to do is create an Android emulator that we can actually use for our debugging process. So up at the very top, I'm going to click on Tools, Android, and then AVD Manager. Once I click on that, we get a nice big pop-up, something about your virtual devices. So a virtual device is an Android emulator. It is a window that lets us run the Android operating system inside of Windows. So we will create a virtual device. By default, I have Nexus 5 selected. If you see another default selection, that's totally fine. Just make sure that you get a screen size right around 5 inches. So the Nexus 5 is 4.95. That's good enough for me. I'll click Next. And then here is the next little troublesome bit, I guess you could say. By default, it tries to create a emulator with version 24 of Android. Right now, React Native is making use of React Native version 23. So instead, I'm going to select Marshmallow Download and go through the download process again. So just like the others, this will only take a moment to get started. We'll go through the download, the unzipping, and installation. I had considered, I knew that there were going to be some pauses here for downloading and unzipping, and I'm kicking myself because I really wanted to put together some jokes, that I could tell you while the installation was going, but I just completely forgot it. Maybe next time we'll do some funny jokes. Anyways, all right, let's hit finish. Download is all finished. And now we can select that API level 23. Then click next. This has some information about the device we're about to build. We don't have to configure anything else here. I'll just click next, or in this case finish, excuse me. And then finally, I can find Nexus 5. This is now my emulator. This is my virtual device that I can launch on my desktop. So on the far right hand side is a play button underneath Actions. I'll click it, and this is going to start up our Android emulator. So I get spinner, and wow, yep, it really looks like an actual phone. So this is going to take a little bit of time to boot up initially, but we still have a little bit of setup left to do. And this last little bit is certainly, let me tell you, it is definitely the painful part. This is the part where you definitely made the right decision by checking out my course, because otherwise there are not a lot of solutions online for troubleshooting this last little bit. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what the problem is. We are just going to jump to the solution and what a solution it is. At my start menu, I'm going to open it up, and then I'm going to search for system settings. And the result I should get here is view advanced system settings. I'll go ahead and click it. And then I get my system properties window right here. This might look a little bit familiar if you've ever messed around with Windows that much. I've got tabs like computer name, hardware, and advanced. So on the advanced window, I want to click on environment variables. So we are going to add 2 environment variables to Windows. The first one that we're going to add, I'll click on new, and then I'm going to enter a name of Java Home. So by default, the React Native packager, or the thing that kind of like builds our application, expects to have access to this environment variable called Java Home. But by default, it doesn't actually exist on a brand new operating system. One thing I want to mention is that if you already have a variable of Java Home, you do not need to add this one in. So if you scan over this list, you see one that says Java Home, you don't need to go through this process. But if you do not see Java Home, go ahead and click on that new button and add the variable name of Java Home. Then for a variable value, we will click on Browse Directory. And in the window that pops up, I'll click on this PC. I'll click on the C drive. I'll click on Program Files. I'll expand Java. And finally, I will select the JDK that we just installed. So JDK 1.8. And then I'll click OK. And then OK again. So now I have a environment variable of Java underscore home and a value of C program files, Java, JDK, blah, blah, blah. All right, one other thing that we need to do. We also need to add in another directory to our path variable. So on this list of different environment variables, you should already have one listed here called path. So definitely scroll up and down. I guarantee you have it. I'll click on edit because I want to edit my path. And then I will click on new on the right-hand side, top right-hand side. And you can see right here we can enter in a path. So if you recall, when we were going through the Android Studio setup, I said, hey, check out your username right there, right? And for me, it was computer. For you is whatever your username is. This is where that is relevant, okay? So this is where we're going to make use of that. So I'm going to enter in my path. So I'll put in C users computer. So again, for me, it is computer. For you is whatever your login username is. For me, it's computer. For you, it will be something different. And then we're going to point it to app data local, Android SDK platform-tools, like so. As a quick little check, just to make sure that I have the right link, I am going to copy this link. So I selected everything. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to then open up Windows Explorer, paste the link, and just verify, yes, this directory exists here. So again, just go ahead, copy that link, paste it into Windows Explorer, verify that it exists. If you get an error message popping up that says like, hey, that directory doesn't exist, chances are you entered in the incorrect username. So make sure that you've got the correct username for your login on your particular machine. Okay, so now that this is all done, I'll click OK. I'll click OK. I'll click OK. And the last thing I'm going to do is restart my command prompt now. So I'm going to close the command prompt. I will open it back up by searching for command, right-click on it, run as administrator. And now we are finally ready to actually test our application inside of the emulator. So I'm going to change back to my project directory, which for me is on my E drive. So I'm now inside of my project directory. It'll be whatever your working directory is, wherever you put your projects. For me, I'm calling it React Native. And then the name of the project that we just generated, which is albums. So the very last step inside of here, I will write out React-Native run-Android. And this is, I'll be totally honest with you, this is the absolute moment of truth right here as to whether or not this is going to work. When I run that command, you'll see another window pop up. This is the React Native packager. This is what takes all of our JavaScript code, compresses it all down into a single JavaScript file, and then makes it available to the device. And then over here, back in the original window, our application is building for the Android device, and it's then going to automatically install and open it on the device. And there we go. So installing APK on appdebug.apk, and then we can see everything pop up over here on the right-hand side. Fetching JavaScript bundle, that means that it is pulling all the starter code, and then eventually, yep, there we go. Welcome to React Native. So by default, to refresh any code, I know that I'm going to give you a little bit of instructions right now that are very particular to Android, and I know that they might not make a ton of sense until we start writing some code, but I just want to mention them very quickly. First off, by default, to refresh our simulator or to get any changes to our code base that we've made, we can follow the directions right on here. So just double tap R to refresh, and as you can see, it makes another request for our JavaScript bundle. The other thing I want to mention is shake or press menu button for dev menu. So looking down here, okay, I don't really see any menu button like it makes reference to. And then looking on the right-hand side, I also don't see any. So here's a little trick. To open up this dev menu that it's talking about, we can press Control-M, and that opens up the development menu. So as we work through the course, I will be using the iOS simulator, but I will many times say, okay, I'm going to open up my development menu right here. We on Android do that by pressing Control-M. And again, just to be clear, whenever I refer to refreshing the application, we will double tap R to refresh our simulator. Okay, so that's it. We got our Android emulator up and working. The last thing that I want to mention to you is, hey, we went through all this process just to get here. What happens when I close everything? How do I get everything started back up? So once you close everything, let's say you shut down your computer for the night or whatever it might be, you can get started again by opening up your Android Studio again. You can open up your React Native project again. You'll go back up to the Tools menu, Android, AVD Manager, and then click the play button on the right. That will start up the emulator. And then inside of our command line at the command prompt, we will change into our project directory and run the same command again, React-Native run-Android. So those are the two steps for getting started back up if you ever decide to take a break or shut down your computer for the night or whatever it might be. React Native, run Android, and don't forget to start up the emulator as well. Okay, so I hope this didn't seem that bad because trust me, I spent a tremendous amount of time poring over Android setup to getting it down to like just the bare essentials of what you need to install to get started. So hopefully everything is working now. Let's continue and start working on our first application in the next section.